Mark Passio, who some of you have seen in the lobby at his table this weekend, is an independent researcher, public speaker, radio talk show host, conference organizer, and freedom activist from Philadelphia, right here in Pennsylvania. Mark has undertaken the task of assembling vast amounts of research in the areas of metaphysics, occultism, spirituality, symbology, and consciousness studies. In 2007, Mark began presenting the information in the form of a presentation series entitled What on Earth is Happening?, with the intention of bringing the implications of this body of knowledge to a greater public awareness. In 2010, Mark began hosting his own weekly internet radio show, also called What on Earth is Happening? And that is something that you can access on your computers. It is live every Sunday on the Oracle Broadcasting Network. Mark is also one of the co-hosts of Free Your Mind, the Philadelphia-based conference on consciousness, mind control, and the occult. And it is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce him, Philadelphia's own Mark Passio.
Well, I want to say thanks to everyone involved at MUFON for hosting this great conference and inviting me to speak. And I want to thank you all for being here today. My presentation today is entitled Morality and Disclosure: Moral Issues Involved in the Continued Cover-Up of Extraterrestrial Phenomena. Let's jump right in. As Peter said, I host a show called What on Earth is Happening? This is also the title of my website, whatonearthishappening.com. There's a tremendous body of material there. I highly encourage everyone to check it all out. I'm also one of the co-hosts of the Free Your Mind conference. We started this back in 2011, had a great event in Philadelphia, and we're going to be hosting Free Your Mind 2, a conference on consciousness, mind control, and the occult. This is coming up this April 2013 here in Philadelphia. We already have 20 speakers lined up for this great event, and for more information you can visit freeyourmindconference.com. There are also tons of posters and flyers at my table. Please take one on the way out.
I want to add that Alfred Weber and Andrew
Bashaga, yes.
are also very well known in the UFO community. And
Yes.
that's a very big overlap.
In the exopolitics movement as well, yes. So we'll be having a lot of crossover and overlap. What my presentation is about today is not any of these four paradigms. If anyone believes that the solutions lie in politics, religion, scientism, or the quote-unquote New Age movement, you're going to be sorely disappointed by my lecture here today, because that is not what this is going to be about. And these I consider boxes for consciousness, to keep consciousness confined. Well, what the lecture is really going to attempt to get at the heart of is something that smashes all of these paradigms, and that is the truth. We have to really go further than what our comfort level wants to allow us to take in. And so you're going to be hearing some things today that may make you feel uncomfortable. George Orwell said that if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. So again, there may be some things that take you out of your comfort zone here today. For those who know me and know my presentation style, my tact is not one of gentleness oftentimes. It is straight ahead. And I don't believe that there's any time for baby spoon feeding information to people. We've come far too far to the precipice for that, and there's not enough time to do that. We need to take the wrecking ball approach, as I call it, and shatter the illusions and shatter the lies, and just put it out there plainly for people. And if they accept it, they accept it, and if they reject it, well, that's on them. But the truth cannot be unheard. So I'm here to plant seeds, if nothing else. I ask people not to fall into the mind state of what I call emotional mind control. And this is attempting to gauge the veracity or the truthfulness of information simply based on how it makes you feel. This is a really dangerous path to go down, and too many people judge information this way. The truth makes us feel uncomfortable. The truth often insults us. It is combative in many ways because we are very attached to illusory perceptions that we don't want to let go of. And if you're gauging information's truthfulness based on your emotions, it's not a good way to do it. Now, don't get me wrong. Emotions are incredibly important, but we can't let that guide where we're willing to go as far as truth is concerned. I gave a presentation back in 2010 entitled, "Don't Count on Disclosure." This was my first foray into the ufology field. I gave it at the Philadelphia UFO Awareness Day, hosted by Pennsylvania MUFON. The subtitle of the lecture was "Reasons Not to Expect Official Disclosure in Any Way That Resembles Truth." And in this lecture, I talked about the powers that be, their reasons for not wanting disclosure getting out. This included utmost of primary importance, the continuity of control. That is what this is ultimately all about, in case anyone has not figured that out yet. This is about maintaining control over the human population. The existing power structure does not want to relinquish that control. It is about the perpetuation of the fossil fuel-based energy scarcity fraud. And it is a fraud. Energy is all around us and available in unlimited quantities if we only know how to tap into that real work of nature. And it is a lie that we are here and everything is scarce. That is there to keep fear going. And only when you're in fear are you able to be controlled. So that's another reason for this continued cover-up. It is also about the continuation of the cover-up of true human origins, as some speakers have actually talked about here today and yesterday. And this is because if you keep someone's origins from them, their true origins, they are also more apt to be controlled by you. It's ultimately about the suppression of consciousness, which I'm going to be talking about a lot here today. And this is a presentation more about consciousness and how it is connected to the UFO phenomenon and what drives the continued cover-up at a psychological level, at the dynamic of mind. So ultimately, the embargo on disclosure is about the suppression of consciousness and the human imagination. I closed that lecture with moral considerations of the disclosure topic, and that's what the remainder of this presentation is going to be about. It's going to attempt to answer two primary questions here today. Why does the cover-up continue? This is about causal factors. If we don't understand causal factors, we are powerless to solve any problems that we may encounter. We have to get to the root fundamental reasons, the root causes. Then we can understand why the effects are manifesting. And who is truly responsible? Who holds the most moral culpability involved in the embargo on disclosure? So I'm going to talk about the Roswell incident as a case study to get at the psychological dynamics at play in this famous incident. We're all familiar with this incident, and I'm in no way the authority on it by any means. But again, I'm attempting to look at this not from the nuts and bolts perspective, but from the perspective of what psychological dynamics are underlying this incident within the human mind. So let's give some background on the event. July 2nd, 1947, a saucer-shaped craft crashes on the Foster Ranch near Corona, New Mexico, not far from Roswell Army Airfield. July 3rd, William Mac Brazel, the foreman of the Foster Ranch, the site of the crash debris, finds the remains of the crashed saucer. Pieces were spread out over an area more than half a mile long. Everyone who Brazel showed the pieces of the wreckage agree that it was unlike any material that they had ever seen on Earth. On July 6th, Brazel showed pieces of the wreckage to Chavez County Sheriff George Wilcox. Wilcox calls intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel of Roswell Army Airfield. Marcel drives to the sheriff's office, he inspects the wreckage, and he reports to his commanding officer, Colonel William Blanchard. Blanchard then orders Marcel to proceed to the ranch with Brazel and collect as much of the wreckage as possible. On the 7th, Marcel and Sheridan Cavett of the Counterintelligence Corps collect wreckage from the crash site. On the 8th, in the morning, Marcel and Cavett arrive back at Roswell Army Airfield with 2 carloads of wreckage from the crash site. Marcel accompanies the wreckage on a flight to Fort Worth Army Airfield. July 8th at noon, Colonel Blanchard at Roswell AAF orders Public Information Officer Lieutenant Walter Hout to issue a press release telling the country that the Army had found the remains of a crashed flying saucer. Again, as Stephen just alluded to in his lecture previously, the embargo was almost ended at Roswell. We came very close to getting disclosure then and there as a result of this event and this press conference, this press release. On July 8th in the afternoon, it only took a couple of hours, General Clemens McCullen in Washington, D.C. ordered General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth, this was Blanchard's commanding officer, to quash the flying saucer story by creating a cover story, a cover-up, and to send some of the crash material immediately to Washington, D.C. July 8th in the afternoon, Roger Ramey held a press conference at the 8th Air Force Headquarters at Fort Worth, in which he announced that what had crashed at Corona was in fact a weather balloon, not a flying saucer. And to make his story more convincing, he showed the press the remains of a damaged weather balloon that he claimed was the actual wreckage from the crash site at the Foster Ranch. July 8th in the evening, some evening newspapers, including the Chicago Daily News, Los Angeles Herald Express, San Francisco Examiner, and Roswell Daily Record, carried the initial flying saucer version of the crash event. The New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Chicago Tribune were morning papers, so they carried only the weather balloon cover-up story, after being sold that version of the events via the Fort Worth press conference. On July 8th, search groups of soldiers were sent to meticulously scour the debris field at the Foster Ranch, removing all traces of evidence that there had ever been a crash there, that anything had ever occurred there. Unknown to Major Jesse Marcel and most of the other military officers that were involved in the events of the last few days, the main body of a crashed saucer had already been recovered by a military retrieval team a few days earlier and a few miles from the Foster Ranch debris field. That was simply the debris from the craft, but the main body of the wreckage was found elsewhere. Approximately a mile from the main crash site of the saucer itself, they found several bodies of small humanoids and also recovered them. After reporting his discovery of the Foster Ranch debris field, Mac Brazel was held in military custody for a little over a week. Following this period of detention, Brazel repudiated his entire initial story. He completely changed his tone and didn't want anything to do with the event after the military had him for a week. He refused to talk about the incident even after his release, even with his closest friends. He remained in so much fear following this incident that he claimed that if he ever found anything else unusual, he wouldn't talk about it with anyone. Okay? He would remain completely silent. And there you saw a newspaper clipping talking about Brazel's harassment. Let's talk further about the intimidation factor that went on during this event. Marion Strickland, a neighbor of Mac Brazel, was ordered by military officers to tell anyone who asked her about the material that was recovered from the Foster Ranch debris site that there was absolutely nothing special about it in any way whatsoever, and that there was no excitement or curiosity on the part of the local people about the material. They wanted her to just lie and cover up the incident. Brazel told Marion that he was under severe emotional stress after his detainment by the military, and that while detained, he was threatened that if he opened his mouth regarding the incident, that he would be thrown in a jail cell indefinitely. Sheriff George Wilcox, who Brazel brought the initial debris to, and his wife Inez Wilcox, were paid a visit by military police following the incident. They told George and Inez that if they ever told anyone anything about what they had seen, not only would they be killed, but that their entire family would be killed. George was very shaken up by this, and he resigned as the sheriff of Chavez County shortly thereafter. Inez tacitly accepted that the whole incident was being kept quiet for reasons of, quote, national security, and remained silent about the event thereafter, feeling that it was in the best interest of the country not to talk about it. You know, as we know, the whole cliche, national security, can mean whatever they want it to mean. They just slap that label on anything they don't want us to know about and expect us to just swallow it because they said it's for national security. Glenn Dennis, a mortician who witnessed some of the bodies that had been retrieved from the crash site, was told by 2 military officers, "If you open your mouth, we'll bury you in the desert, and they'll be picking your bones out of the sand." He was told that to his face by military MPs. Roy Danzer, a local plumber who saw one of the dying beings from the crash on a stretcher at the Roswell Base Hospital, was told by a military officer, "We'll know if you talk. We'll know who you talk to, and you will simply disappear." A government by and for the people, sure. Members of the public and even law enforcement officers, again like George Wilcox, they were told that their families would be in jeopardy if they talked about the Roswell incident. During their efforts to silence eyewitnesses to these events, military officers made it abundantly clear that they were completely willing to murder children. They were completely willing to murder children if those whom they ordered to remain silent disobeyed them and spoke out about what they had witnessed. You're living in a free country, sure. Let's look at the psychological dynamics and behavior involved in these events. What characteristics do they encompass? Well, we see fear. We see secrecy. We see deception. We see disinformation campaigns being waged. We see intimidation, a lot of that. We see outright violence and threats of violence. We see cowardice on the part of the people who simply back down when the threats are made. And ultimately, the overall dynamic is that there is no allegiance to truth. And that's the main crux of the problem. Now, with all of these being the main psychological driving dynamics of an event like this, and I would suggest to you that this is simply a microcosm of the entire UFO alien phenomenon. This paints a broad picture, but an accurate way of what the overall phenomenon entails, as far as human psychological dynamics are concerned. Can't you just imagine that our star brothers and sisters are just so anxious for us to show up in their backyard, with those being the primary dynamics at work among the human race? I mean, I'll bet you they can't wait to greet us with open arms. So let's look at another dynamic involved. And I have 2 prizes to hand out to the audience during this section for correct answers to a couple questions I want to be posing to you. I'm going to be posing to you. At the bottom down here, we have Mac Brazel and the public, who want the truth brought out about this, who wanted to know what it was about at first. But Mac brought the initial debris wreckage to Sheriff George Wilcox, okay? Then Wilcox contacted intelligence officer Jesse Marcel. And from there, he reported the finding to his commanding officer, Colonel William Blanchard. Blanchard made the initial contact to the military press, and he wanted the military to report the finding honestly at first. So he commanded Lieutenant Walter Howe to initial that honest press release. But then Roger Ramey ordered Blanchard to stand down and not report the finding honestly, and he held the press conference to the media that gave the cover-up story, the weather balloon nonsense. He was under orders from General Clements McClellan in Washington, D.C. So, can anyone tell me what we're witnessing here? What is this structure that's going on? What is this dynamic that we're seeing here? Anyone? Yes. Okay, it's a pyramid scheme, but what dynamic are we talking about? What's taking place within the individuals who are all seemingly deferring to those who are above them? Chain of command was the gentleman's response. And that is close, but it is not correct. Most people think of this structure as the chain of command. A free DVD with 2 lectures from the first Free Your Mind conference to anyone who can tell me what it really is.
Chain of control.
Close. It is a chain. I'll give you that hint. It starts with chain of. But what are we looking at, really?
Chain of deception.
No. It involves that. Anyone else?
Chain of mind control.
You're getting closer. You're getting warmer.
Chain of passing the buck.
What?
Bearing the story, like chain of bearing.
Chain of humanity.
No.
Chain of bending the truth.
For what reason?
Passing the buck.
You're real close, Bob. You're very close.
They were not in control to do that.
When you're passing the buck, what are you really doing? You're trying to pass blame on. But if you're abdicating that responsibility and truth to someone else, what are you doing? What are you doing to them who are above you?
You're relinquishing your control to the next person.
By doing what? By doing what to the people above you?
Giving them the responsibility.
Giving them the power and responsibility.
And so no one has hit upon the word. Okay, so I'll continue and I'll give you the answer here. And when you hear it, you'll really, hopefully it will be an aha moment. It is not the chain of command, but it is in fact the chain of obedience. That's what you're seeing at work, psychologically. These people are obeying those who they consider in a superior position to them and deferring to them instead of being honest to themselves and to the truth. So, can anyone, for another DVD, free DVD, I'll tell you what, I'll give you, the prize will be both of them, and you can give the other one to whoever you want, okay? What's at the top of this chain of obedience? What is the psychological dynamic that drives the whole thing?
Fear.
Not fear, but that's part of the dynamic. What's really going on inside the minds of the individuals, if you really think about it and you're honest with yourself about the answer? For someone to be obedient, what must their belief system entail? A belief in what?
Authority.
It is a what? Who said it? Who said it?
Authority.
Here you go. Well, you can give them to whoever you want, okay? It is the belief in authority that drives this entire dynamic. The belief that someone else is in charge and in control of you. And that's what is driving the dynamic of no allegiance to truth. The belief in authority is ultimately what keeps the embargo of the truth of this entire phenomenon going. And that may come as a shock to some people. This is where our world really is at right now. It is under this dynamic, under total control by people who we don't really know who they are, and most of us don't really understand their agenda. They work from the shadows, and they are amassing and gathering all of the energy of this world to them, okay, in a totalitarian fashion, because they have capitalized on people's belief in authority, and they have built this pyramidal structure, just as we saw in the dynamic with Roswell. And their entire modality of control, their methodology of control, is based upon occult knowledge. Now, when people hear the word occult, things go off in their head because this word has been co-opted and controlled. The mind control is at work through words, to associate words with other meanings that they really do not have. The word occult only means hidden. It comes from the Latin verb. I'm going to talk a lot about the meaning of words. The Latin verb occultare means to hide, to conceal, or to keep secret. And the two dynamics that keeps this chain of obedience going, that keeps it perpetuated, is hierarchy and compartmentalization. Hierarchy, or the chain of obedience, and compartmentalization. You keep things in seemingly disconnected areas of interest and areas of operations, so that one hand that is working on one part of the project does not know what the other hand that is working on the other part of the project is doing. That is how they are able to keep knowledge occulted or hidden from view. It is a pyramid scheme, and it is a scheme that is based upon obedience. It's not about the chain of command. Command implies power. Ultimately, we are abdicating our power to the individuals at the top by being obedient to their immoral commands and not following the truth. This is a religion. And that is another thing that people will maybe, find shocking to them. The word religion comes from the Latin language as well, from the verb religare in Latin, which means to tie back, to hold back, to bind, or to thwart from forward progress. That is what the word religion means. Now, it's very interesting that the word religare in Latin can also mean to reunite, to bring back together again. So religion has, in its etymology, in its etymological root, has a dual meaning. And we have to look into the dual nature of religion to really understand this. See, there are two kinds of religion. There is false religion, and then there is true religion. And again, please don't think about this in terms of world religions like Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, etc. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a belief system, okay? False religion is a belief system that is based in illusion, while true religion is based upon truth. False religion ultimately ties us, again, the word coming from religare, to tie or to bind. It ties us with illusion and deception in believing in things that are not real. It thwarts our progress in consciousness. It holds us back from the truth. And ultimately, it binds us from evolving as a species. Conversely, in the sense that it reunites, true religion ties back illusion and deception out of our lives. It ties back the lie. It thwarts the progression of tyranny. It reunites us with our true divine essence, the spark of the divine that is within us all. And true religion does bind something, and it binds all forms of evil at work in our lives. Authority is a false religion. The belief in authority, let me say that again emphatically, is a false religion. If you believe in this concept, you are a believer in a false religion, and you are under mind control. And I don't care who that offends. The truth cannot be unheard. That is the way that it is. That is not my opinion. This is about taking you out of your comfort zone if you believe in this religion. It's one of the two universal religions, along with money. that keeps humanity back from forward progress in consciousness and is ultimately keeping us in a prison here on earth, a prison of the mind. The religion of authority is based upon the illusion and falsehood that some are masters who may set arbitrary dictates which are not based in morality and which are enforced by violence, while others are slaves who have a moral obligation, quote unquote, to obey the arbitrary dictates that are set by the masters. That is what the belief in authority is. It is not my opinion of what it is, that is what it is. And this is a falsehood. It does not exist in reality. It is an illusion. It is a mental construct of an imbalanced mind and an imbalanced psyche. The biggest manifestation of this universal world religion called the belief in authority is government. Let's look at the etymology of the word government for a moment. Government comes from the Latin verb gubernare, which can often be rendered as governare, with a change in the internal B becoming a V. But since there's no V in classical Latin, it is most often seen as the verb gubernare. And this is the root of gubernatorial, relating to governor, okay, or governing. Gubernare means to control in Latin. The second part of the word ment comes from the Latin noun mens mentis, which is the root of our word mental in English. It means mind. By its very etymological definition, the word government itself means mind control, literally, to control the mind. All forms of government, the belief in authority, is mind control. Sadly, however, most human beings erroneously teach the false religion of authority and unquestioning obedience to it as virtues to our children, instead of instilling in our young the truth about what this hideous dogmatic belief system called authority actually is. And what it actually is the path to every form of evil and annihilation that we ever witness on this planet. As only a cursory study of even modern human history will attest to. This is what authority gets you. People giving their minds, their bodies, and their souls over to seemingly charismatic leaders who will promise them anything as long as they will follow them and obey their orders. And this is what the obedience ideology ultimately leads us. Whether you want to accept that or not, get a good hard look. That is where the chain of obedience leads you. To a grave. And we've seen it over and over and over again throughout history. And this has everything to do with the UFO and alien phenomenon. Because the same thing is happening in the mind. Someone is conceding to someone else who they believe is an authority. They're going against truth, and ultimately that's where it gets you in the end. If you don't want to look at it from a historical perspective, look at it from a psychological perspective. Study the Milgram experiments that were conducted in the early 1960s by Yale psychologist Dr. Stanley Milgram. He conducted mock psychological experiments to find out how many people would be willing to administer a lethal electric shock to another human being if they were incrementally ordered to do so by an authority figure. And we think of ourselves as so moral as individuals. But let's look at what this psychological mock study showed us, because all of the people being shocked were actually actors. The people who were doing the shocking were actually the test subjects. And they weren't really administering real shocks, of course, because they would have killed the other person. But they were trying to see how far they could push people to do something that was immoral. Shockingly, pun intended, regardless of sex, age, economic class, cultural or religious background, almost 70% of all test subjects obediently followed their orders and went all the way to the lethal dosage. of electricity. 70% of human beings, if commanded to do so by an authority figure, were willing to murder another person if commanded to do so, just because they perceive them as an authority. This experiment was reconducted in the late 1990s. The results were the same. Nothing had changed. Whenever belief in and obedience to authority supersedes allegiance to truth and morality on a mass scale, the entire population ends up in a prison of its own making. And ladies and gentlemen, whether you have really come to recognize this in your own mind or not, this is where we are. This is where we are. And if we want to get out of that cage, we have to free our mind and stop believing in illusion. Because the police state of total control is at our doorstep. They have the population under a state of hypnosis, resembling sleep, in a state of unconsciousness. And the Big Brother state is looming fast. The shackles are getting ready to go on. The thing that ultimately drives this is ignorance, because so many people are brainwashed by mass media and are willing to believe what they're told if they perceive it to be coming from authority figures. Same dynamic at work in Roswell. People just completely abdicating their own personal responsibility to tell the truth to someone they considered superior to them. The solution for this problem is the development of consciousness, which is working upon ourselves. These are the components of our consciousness. The actual manifestations of our consciousness are our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. It is ultimately about doing work upon yourself to bridge these three components of consciousness and to unify them, such that as we think, so we feel, so we act, and there is no contradiction between these three modes of consciousness. That we cannot be torn apart from within. That we cannot be made to do something that we don't truly believe in. That we feel badly about doing, but we'll do it anyway. Okay? That's oppositional consciousness. The goal is to bridge these three modalities and bring them into unity consciousness. It has been called the body-mind-spirit connection. And ultimately, this is the solution. The type of knowledge that we ultimately need is that each and every one of us alive on this planet are sovereign beings. Sovereign beings. Let's look at the roots of the word sovereign for a moment. In Latin, super, which the first part of sovereign comes from, again, you could re-render a V in classical Latin as a B or a P often. Super in Latin means above. And regnum, the root of reign, is rulership or control. So super regnum, sovereign, means one who is above being ruled, who is above being controlled by another. Or in other words, one who is not a subject or a slave. And that is all the word sovereign means. It means not a slave. That's what the word sovereign means. Not a slave. I am a sovereign being. I am not a slave. You are all sovereign beings. None of you are slaves. Whether you understand it or not, that is the truth. It can never be any other way. Someone can only claim that it is another way, and others may accept the validity of their claim even though it is not valid. It is completely invalid. There are no masters or slaves, and there can never be. There can only be a claim to that and an acceptance of it by someone else, but it is always a lie. We are all sovereign under the Creator, whether we recognize it or not. Sovereignty, therefore, is the rulership of the kingdom of oneself. You're not ruling anyone else. You are the ruler of the kingdom of you. whereby one's thoughts, emotions, and actions, their consciousness, exists in a state of unison, non-duality, non-contradiction, non-opposition. Sovereignty is about self-ownership, recognizing that you own yourself, you own your consciousness, your mind, body, and spirit. No one else owns it. Stop giving it away to other people. That's where we get into trouble. That's where all the problems of this world are ultimately generated from, is giving away our power to other people who we think have our better interest in mind. And often all they're about doing is controlling for their own selfish interests. Sovereignty is ultimately about self-mastery. Thomas Jefferson, I believe, said it best. He said that if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and what never will be. You can look at it mathematically for those who are a bit more left-brained, and I've come up with this little equation, okay, to help people understand the dynamic. The presence of truth in the lives of the people of a society is always inversely proportional to the presence of tyranny in that society. That symbol in the middle means inversely, it means proportional to, okay, proportional to, and that's the inverse. So if you have tyranny, you don't have truth. If you have truth, you don't have tyranny. It's that simple. It's an equation. This is a law in nature. It always works like that, everywhere. It's a natural law. The dynamic at work that is keeping people from the recognition of this knowledge is the abdication of their personal responsibility. And I should have put on the slide the attempted abdication of personal responsibility, because you cannot really abdicate your own personal responsibility. Again, like the claim of authority, it is only a claim that you can do that. In actuality, in reality, you cannot abdicate your personal responsibility. You're always responsible for your own actions and behaviors. Many people want to give up their own personal responsibility to choose between right and wrong action to someone else, someone they consider superior to them, who would make that decision for them. They imagine that somehow this could absolve them of their personal responsibility to make right choices. Not only is this abhorrent and deplorable, it is actually impossible, as each individual is always personally responsible for the choices they make and the actions they take, regardless of their belief otherwise, not the truth. See, the problem ultimately is rooted in the belief in illusion, that we can do things that we cannot do. Human beings are real good at this. They believe that they can do all sorts of things that they can't do and that they have no right to do. See, this is what happens when we believe in illusion. You can believe you're going to fly off that cliff all you want, but you're going to go down and hit the bottom. And that's where we're at as a species. The belief in illusion is the root of the problem, and the root of the solution lies in simply abandoning belief systems that do not serve us and that hold us back, or in other words, abandoning religions. Soren Kierkegaard, the philosopher, said that there are really only two ways that humanity is ever fooled. One is to believe that which is not true, and the other is to refuse to accept that which is true. And I would go farther than Kierkegaard, and I would say these are the only two reasons, ultimately, that humanity experiences self-inflicted suffering. We want to believe in illusion, believe in things that are not true, and refuse to accept the truth into our lives. That's why we're going deeper and deeper into bondage and tyranny as a people. So I don't want to leave on a negative note. I want to present the opposite side to this. What is actually the solution? You know, what do we really need to grasp and understand? What's the key out of that cage? What's the way out? So let's look at that dynamic. The way out is the understanding of natural law. And again, if this were understood, you wouldn't have people who are willing to continue to embargo the truth about anything, let alone the UFO and alien phenomenon. They would do their obligation and practice their allegiance to the truth, and they would tell the truth about what they have discovered. But unfortunately, people don't understand this dynamic of natural law. And let me just clear this up before we go any further. When I'm using the word natural here, this is another word that has been co-opted by mind control techniques. Natural has zero to do, nothing to do with the theory of Darwinian macrobiological evolution, or what certain Darwinists call the quote-unquote natural order. Nothing to do with that at all, and I cannot emphasize that enough. It is in fact the exact inversion of that. This is about morality. This is about the definitive knowledge of the difference between right and wrong, is what this is about. Okay? And then choosing the right action over the wrong action. Because this natural law is what ultimately gives us the results of what we have chosen. It's what puts forward the manifestations into our lives of the factors that we have set into motion through the causes called our choices. Okay? So natural, the dictionary definition of natural is inherent, having a basis in nature, reality, and truth, not made or caused by humankind. The word law, the dictionary definition, an existing condition which is both binding and immutable. That means it is in effect at all times and places, and it cannot be changed. Just like gravity or electromagnetism. Okay? These are natural laws. They work the same way at all times and places. They are binding, whether we recognize them or not, and man does not have the power to change the presence of those laws. They are always in effect. I give a working definition for natural law in a practical sense. Natural law is universal, non-man-made, binding and immutable conditions that govern the consequences of our behavior. It governs the consequences of behavior. I have recently stopped calling this natural law in some of my lectures and talks and switched over to the terms universal spiritual law, because that's what it ultimately is, and I think that paints a clearer picture instead of using the co-opted term natural. Many will recognize these as the laws of cause and effect if we are scientifically inclined. Effect invariably follows cause. All effects or manifestations have causes that precede them. For every action, there exists an equal and opposing reaction. We've all heard that. In the New Age movement, we may have heard them as the laws of attraction. The energy that we emit is the energy that we attract. What we are putting out is what we receive back. The universe is like a mirror in that regard. It is reflecting back to us that which we put out into its field of energy. As you think, feel, and act, so shall you be. This is another way that the law of attraction has been expressed, and it's ultimately saying the same things as natural law or universal spiritual law. Karma, it has been called, or moral law, that we reap what we sow. And it has been expressed beautifully, magically, as the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. It's really as simple as that. It doesn't really go beyond that, and I could just say that and say good night, everyone. If people were practicing that truly in their own lives, there would be no problem. But unfortunately, we don't want to accept that truth into our minds and into our hearts. Natural law is about the objective differences between right and wrong. When it comes to right and wrong, there are no shades of gray. It's all one way. That's another very difficult thing for people to hear, because our society is so ensconced in the lie in the religion called moral relativism, which will take us down the path to destruction. There is a difference between right and wrong. It's objective and definitive. Right is that which is correct, that which is based in truth. And wrong is that which is incorrect, that which is not based in truth. That's why we use the term right and wrong, meaning both moral or true, whether it's correct or not. Moral is right. If it is in harmony with natural law, then it is right. If it is in opposition to natural law, then it is wrong. And here's what we mean by in opposition or in harmony or in opposition to natural law means. Actions that are based in a right, if we have the right to do it, the action does not result in harm to other sentient beings. But if it is wrong, if it is immoral, if it is incorrect and not based in truth, then the action that is based in that dynamic results in harm to other sentient beings. It is that simple, but we really need to understand that. We need to know what a right is and what a right is not. This is part of the difficult part of this dynamic. Most people don't understand what a right is and what a right is not because they don't understand definitively the objective difference between right and wrong, unfortunately. It's best to understand what rights are in the apophatic sense. Many will have never heard that term before. What it means is in the negative, by describing what something is not, and through describing what it is not, coming to a clearer understanding of what it is. Okay, so it's affirmation through negation, the elimination of known negatives. It's your reasoning by way of elimination of known negatives. That's called the apophatic inquiry method to get to truth. Okay? Know which actions are not rights because they cause harm. There's too many rights to list. We have infinite numbers of rights of what we can do and create. But there's a very short list of things we may not do because they cause harm. That's the things we really need to understand. Are we causing harm and suffering to another? Then it's not a right. The truth regarding rights is not dependent on numbers or population. Doesn't matter how many people you have. Natural law holds true at all times and places and all numbers of population. Rights that do not exist for an individual, and this is key, cannot be granted, cannot be created or granted to any other individual or group of individuals. See, we think we have the right to create governments and give them rights that individuals don't have. And that's impossible. It can't be done. Again, people can claim that they can do it, but it will never make it true. The way out is ultimately about the development of conscience, which is coming into the full knowledge of what natural law is about and how it operates. Conscience comes from the Latin con, meaning together, and the Latin verb sciere, the root of the word science, meaning to know. You put them together, conscience means to know together. It is knowledge. Conscience is knowledge. That's something many people will not have heard before either. Conscience is knowledge. Okay? It is the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong. And it's common sense, or it should be. Unfortunately, we have lost contact with common sense. And therefore, many of us are not exercising conscience. Now, exercising conscience is when action comes into play. Because when you're exercising your conscience, you're willfully choosing right action over wrong action once you've come to know the definitive difference between right and wrong. That's how you exercise conscience. So this is what wisdom is. Conscience, the development of conscience, is coming to a level of understanding because you're acquiring knowledge about right and wrong. Then you're applying it in the world. That's called the exercise of conscience. Okay? And that's what wisdom really is. This is a hard one for most people to swallow, but it is also true. By the very definition of the term, of the phrase, if someone is following orders, it is an impossibility for them to be exercising conscience. You cannot be exercising conscience if you are abdicating your personal responsibility to know and live truth to someone else. If you are simply following their orders, it cannot be done. You could believe you can do it, but once again, that will never make it the case. And we saw where the belief in authority and the abdication of personal responsibility to make right choices ultimately leads us. Gerald Massey, the Egyptologist, said that they must find it difficult, those who have taken authority as truth rather than truth as authority. We can't continue to make justifications, which comes from the Latin noun jus, meaning right, and the Latin verb facere, meaning to make or to create. Justifications are attempts to create rights. Rights cannot be created by man. Rights come from the creative force in the universe, regardless of what you want to call that. You can call it God, you can call it Allah, you can call it Buddha, you can call it Christ consciousness. I don't care what you call it. That's up to you to make a one-to-one connection with that intelligent creative force that is what we are all a part of. But you cannot create a right. It is impossible. Rights are inherent to creation. Justifications are feeble, tiny, puny human attempts to create rights that do not exist. I was just following orders is never a valid excuse or justification for immoral behavior, as we saw in Roswell with the cover-up and then the intimidation and threats of violence that were made against witnesses. And I'm sure they would say, I'm just following my commanding officer's orders. Well, that's never a valid justification for immoral behavior, and it should never be accepted by anyone as some sort of a valid excuse for immoral behavior. An order giver is even more morally culpable than an order follower, is even more morally culpable than an order giver. Now, that does not absolve the order giver of their moral culpability. I didn't say that. What I did say is that the order follower is always more morally culpable than even the one who whispers in their ear and tells them it's okay to go and do the immoral act. Because the order follower is always the one who is actually taking the action. The order giver isn't doing the action. The order follower is doing the action. The theft of truth that constitutes the UFO embargo, the embargo on truth about the UFO and alien phenomenon. The theft of truth about something this world-changing and life-transforming regarding extraterrestrial life and technology actually constitutes a crime against all of humanity, and no justification should ever be accepted when offered by the perpetrators of this crime. They need to be held to account for this crime. The researcher David Icke has this to say on justifications. Accept responsibility for yourself and your actions, thoughts, and words. You alone make choices. You alone are answerable to the consequences of your behavior. The feeble excuse that your boss required it, the established expected it, holds no truth or justification. What is the point of even having principles if you allow others to dictate your behavior? At the end of the day, you will judge your performance and the contribution that you have made to creation. It will not be based on what another expected of you or what you did because you felt trapped. This is not a justification and should not be accepted as an excuse. We're all ultimately responsible for our actions. One of the ways out is through an apology, and I call this the cosmic apology. The apology on the level of the species. To admit that we were wrong, that we have done wrong, and that we have allowed wrong to be committed in our midst and in our name. A large part of the crisis in consciousness which we are currently facing is due to the fact that most people are not only unwilling to admit their own wrongdoing, but also unwilling to stand up and call others on their wrongdoing. True forgiveness. I wanted to have something about forgiveness in here, because it isn't about punishment. As long as this embargo comes down, we can forgive. We don't have to necessarily punish people for what they've done, as long as they're willing to come forward, tell the truth, admit responsibility. Okay? In New Age circles, sometimes you have this false notion of forgiveness. And again, making an apology is a source of strength. It's not a weakness. Admitting that you're wrong is a source of strength, not weakness. Because you're coming into harmony with truth, and that's where all power really comes from. But true forgiveness is often misunderstood. It does not mean that continuing to excuse the willful commission of wrongdoing an infinite number of times. That's not what forgiveness is. This is a false notion of forgiveness and unconditional love. Okay, that is naivete at best and cooperation with evil at worst. We have to call people and hold them to account on their wrongdoing and be strong enough to stand in the truth and do that. A sincere apology starts with the willingness to tell the truth. That is where true forgiveness and reconciliation must begin. With the willingness to tell the truth. And we can't do that unless we develop true self-respect. Self-respect, people use the word respect when talking about their relationship to another person. It has nothing to do with another person. True respect has everything to do with oneself. It comes from the Latin prefix re, meaning again, and the Latin verb spectare, meaning to look at. So what respect actually is taking another look, looking at again. And what it ultimately is, when we do this is taking another look upon ourselves and reevaluating what our belief systems have been all about, and whether they have been on the side of truth and justice and peace and order and harmony in the universe. Okay, so that's the device that's going to get us out of this mess. Not any piece of technology. You want the device that's going to solve the problems that we're facing as a species? There it is. It's called a mirror. Develop a deep relationship with one. Take a look at oneself. Take a look into the self. And we need to reevaluate what our mental positions and staying confined and staying attached, our attachments have been. Okay? That's what we need to reevaluate. And that's a process of respect that is internal. The Buddha once said that there are only two mistakes that one can ever make on the pathway to truth: not starting and not going all the way. I know this presentation has probably stretched your minds and it gotten you to maybe take a look at some place where you maybe were uncomfortable to take a look at before. And it brought up some things that may be uncomfortable. But that's where the truth leads, to go past your comfort zone and to go all the way. I'm going to wrap it up right here. Regardless of what anyone's religion may happen to be, government, money, official world religions, scientism, a military, New Age movement, whatever it is, we need to stop attempting to make our religion the truth. And what we need to do is start making the truth our religion. When we do that, then we will wake ourselves up and we will step into the light, and the chains of bondage that have bound this world for so long will start to fall away. We will ascend the ladder to higher consciousness, and in doing so, we will step out of this world hand in hand together and join with our brothers and our sisters in the realm of the infinite. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention.